Ask the Attorney is brought to you by Stephen Kelly Law.
Welcome to Ask the Attorney, brought to you by Stephen Kelly Law.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this edition of Ask the Attorney. I'm your host, Renee Charles, alongside Stephen Kelly. And we're doing things a little differently tonight because we are on location at your office. Yep. We are making some changes with our COVID-19 protocols, and we are 6 feet apart. The crew is all masked and everybody's ready to go, but we want to make sure that we are talking about the issues that you want to know about. And today we're talking about insurance.
Yes.
Insurance coverage is something that everyone needs to have.
Yes.
And not everybody does. But there are also questions about how much insurance do I need. We're talking about automobile insurance.
Yes, a big part of our life is an automobile and accidents, and lawyers get involved. And I thought it was a good topic today to talk about protecting yourself, protecting your loved ones, and what type of insurance you can purchase for yourself so you have that protection after an accident. A lot of people don't think about that prior to an accident, and it hits them too late.
And there are times when you think, I have enough insurance coverage, I've got everything I need. Then something happens and you realize I don't.
Right. These companies come out, some of the companies come out and say, we can save you money on your premiums. But what they don't tell you is you're saving money on your premiums, but you may be cutting yourself short on the coverage you should have.
So let's run through a few different types of coverage here. So first, let's talk about property damage.
Yes, it's a type of coverage you can get to cover the damage you have for your car. That's usually the first issue taken care of after an auto accident, but you have to secure the proper coverage and limits to make sure your car is covered. And as we all know, cars are getting more expensive day in, day out, so you got to make sure you have enough coverage.
So what is the type of coverage? Is there a baseline that you have to have? Or?
Yeah, the state requires a minimum of $20,000.
Okay.
And when you talk to your agent, you should be able to talk to your agent about that you want to get the minimum, and you have to get the minimum at least. However, if you want more coverage, if you have a fancy car, you may want to increase that. You should talk to your agent about that.
So is just the type of car you have the only reason that you would really look at property damage?
Yeah, the value of the car, obviously. If you have a college student who's driving and they have what they call a beater, you wouldn't put as much money on that car.
We all had one of those back in the day, right?
Exactly. I have a couple right now, but you definitely wouldn't put as much coverage on that type of vehicle if it was a brand new Mercedes.
And if you don't get it, what happens?
Well, then you're SOL. You will end up paying the payments on the car, and you'll have no insurance coverage for it.
All right, a couple more types we want to talk about. Same type of questions. Why should you get it? How much should you get? And what if you don't? Bodily injury. So if you're in an accident and somebody is injured, that's where this one comes in.
Very important. And when you get in an auto accident, you get injured, this is the type of coverage that governs what's available to yourself and maybe to the other driver if you're at fault. And it's very important to determine and make sure you have the necessary coverage to make sure you're protecting your loved ones, yourself, and potentially your personal assets if you're the at-fault driver.
Is there a limit?
There is a limit. It's $25,000 for each incident, state of Illinois. But I highly recommend to everyone to go over that dollar amount. And when people come in this office, there's nothing sadder than someone being in an accident having more damages than the $25,000 coverage another person has.
And then you're on the line to pay for it.
Well, that rolls into the other issue we're going to talk about today, and that's the issue of underinsured and uninsured. That's another type of coverage you can buy.
Well, let's roll through a few more of these. Medical payments, that's another type of coverage you should have.
Yeah, absolutely. In workers' compensation cases, I know we've talked about those type of cases. That's not what an automobile case is about. In workers' compensation cases, the employer pays for medical right away, day one. In an automobile case or automobile accident, that's not the case. Okay. So you're starting getting bills, the emergency room, chiropractor, your family doctor, and all of a sudden you're like, well, who's going to pay these bills? Well, this part of the coverage is called medical payment only. You can purchase on your policy, and it starts paying those bills right away.
Now, the next one we have here is underinsured and uninsured.
Yes.
These are perhaps the two most important elements of the type of insurance coverage that you should consider. And when we talked about this, it really opened my eyes to think, wow, this is protecting me in case someone else doesn't have insurance. Is that right?
Strangely enough, the state of Illinois doesn't require you to have this insurance. And obviously, it costs a little extra money on your premium to purchase this insurance. but it's so important. It's so important for yourself. It's so important for your family, your children. And the way it works is this. You have an opportunity to buy underinsured or uninsured coverage. And what that means is if someone hits you and they only have $25,000 worth of coverage for their fault, and your damages are well beyond that, you can access your underinsured policy, that part of your policy, and have coverage. And sometimes underinsured coverage goes up to $100,000, $250,000. So that could be accessible for you, your family, if that person who hit you does not have enough coverage.
And again, if you don't have this type of coverage,
yeah, a lot of times you're going to have to be responsible for those bills. You've got property damage, and sometimes you may be facing, if you can't afford that, bankruptcy. So that's how important these issues are. You're driving down the road, mind your own business, someone else hits you, and your world gets turned upside down. It would be best to have this type of coverage to protect everybody.
And you did say right before we started talking about that one that it is the law to have automobile insurance, but that doesn't mean everybody does.
Exactly.
So having this really helps you balance that if it were to happen to you.
That's a great point. That's the portion of uninsured.
Yeah.
That's when someone hits you does not have insurance, and you have nothing to fall back on to help you pay for the bills and the damage and your bodily injury. So the uninsured portion of the policy then kicks in, and you purchase that, and they will have to honor that.
Is there a baseline you would suggest for this?
I always cover, I love $250,000. It isn't that expensive, and that allows you to at least make sure that you get your bills paid for and the care you need.
Okay. Two more types of insurance we want to go over here. Collision insurance.
Yep. That's just covering the car and the damage. That's
okay.
We usually hear that when you have teenagers, high schoolers. They pay for that beater, and that's the collision coverage.
So how does that compare with property damage?
That pays it right away and takes care of the baseline, just what the car is worth at that time, doesn't cover beyond the value of the car.
Okay, and is there a baseline for that you would suggest getting?
I would suggest the value of the car. I would go with whatever you thought the value of the car is, and I would get that.
Okay, and what about comprehensive insurance?
Now, comprehensive is interesting because it's not involving an auto accident. It's those type of occurrences like we run into a deer runs into you, hit a deer, hail damage. Those type of damage is not caused by another person, but your car gets damaged, you would like it repaired.
And baseline for that one?
Well, the value of the car, maybe a little bit more just because you may have more owed on the car than what the damage is.
So out of these, which ones are required by law that you have?
Meaning the property damage and the bodily injury are required by law. You've got to have that part of your policy. Everything else is something you could select with your agent. And please keep in mind, just because these companies say you're saving money, we can save you on your premiums.
Well, you hear those ads all the time.
All the time. And that's true. You are saving money and you are paying less in premiums. But you don't want to be that person then who gets caught with not enough coverage for your injury, damage that you may need at a later date.
And when we talked about I say baselines, but you have to have this much, this is the limited coverage that you can have, that changes state to state. And that could also change maybe even annually here in Illinois. I mean, it because of what it is right now doesn't mean it's going to be the same thing 10 years down the road. Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. Each state governs their own regulations. State of Illinois has theirs. State of Iowa has theirs. And if you're working with an agent, they should be able to tell you what the change is that year and what you have to meet as a requirement.
Now, let me throw a couple questions at you here from some viewers. I was involved in an auto accident recently, and I'm starting to receive my medical bills. Who pays for those bills?
Well, that's a great question, and we talked a little bit about that in the sense that you would exercise your medical pay portion of your policy first. Usually that's a $5,000 or $10,000 limit, and then so you would hand that over to your own insurance company, and they would pay it right away. Then if your bills exceed that dollar amount, you have to start using your health insurance, and they would be the ones responsible for paying that.
Okay. We talked about comprehensive coverage, but for somebody that is interested in, like they have a large family, and do they need to think of comprehensive coverage more so than someone else, or who really needs to focus on comprehensive?
Well, comprehensive service, I think everybody does, because you never know when anybody can a deer runs out in front of you.
Sure.
So I would certainly consider it and have it for myself if I had a family.
I was thinking when you said, you've got the beater and you've got the kid in high school,
right.
And is comprehensive something that you may not have thought about?
Yes, exactly.
And then here's another question for this one. I was hit by another driver from behind. My bills are over $30,000, but I found out the other driver only has $25,000. What do I do? That kind of goes into that underinsured.
Absolutely. If you don't have the underinsured policy, you have nowhere to go to get the recoupment you need for those damages and the value of the car and your bodily injury. Certainly, though, if you have the underinsured, you then would contact your insurance company and say, they didn't have enough coverage, I want to exercise my rights under my underinsured policy.
Okay, we got some good questions here. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we've got a few more things we want to talk about on the auto insurance. But we want to let everyone know, Stephen Kelly, attorney, 2710 Knoxville Avenue in Peoria, also in Princeton and Springfield. And if people want to call in and ask some questions, 681-1900 is the number. But we're doing it different this time, where they can call, leave a message here, and then someone from your office will get back to answer those questions for them.
We'll respond right away.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
If you have someone who works with you who tests positive, you've been exposed to that, you quarantine, you may have no symptoms. Under those circumstances, I think you can make the argument that, hey, this is related to work.
Right.
You're telling me not to come in and someone at work was exposed. You have an argument that the work comp benefit should be paid to that time period.
People don't call an attorney because their life is going well. You didn't know you were going to need legal help. But when you do, you need legal advice you can trust from an attorney who will help. Stephen P. Kelly will listen to your problem and know what the next steps should be. If you want a plan with results, let Stephen P. Kelly protect you. Stephen P. Kelly will help you explore your options and navigate the legal system.
Well, welcome back to Ask the Attorney. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Renee Charles, along with attorney Stephen Kelly, and we're talking about auto insurance and the things you need to know. First of all, it's required by law to have insurance.
It is.
Not everybody does.
Correct.
So we're going through some of the things that you may need to know so that you can protect yourself. And if, God forbid, you do get into an accident, what do you need to do? So you explained to me that Illinois is a comparative fault state.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, when you feel that you are not the at-fault driver and you want to pursue your rights through an attorney or on your own, Illinois is a comparative fault state, which means this: if you are that party and you are more than 51% responsible at fault, you may not be able to recover. You will not be able to recover. What we do as attorneys and what insurance adjusters do is they assess the facts of the accident and they assess fault. What driver did what, and they try to figure out who's more at fault than the other.
And when you say you won't recover, you're saying won't recover damages from this if it were to go on to a lawsuit or a case?
In most cases, insurance adjusters and companies won't make an offer to you if they believe you're more than 51% at fault.
So how do we determine fault?
Well, that's a great question, and that goes to the facts of the case. And basically, they will look at all the facts. Let's use a basic example. You get an auto accident at Forest Hill and Knoxville and Peoria. You know, the first thing that happens is a police officer comes to the scene and talks to people and may issue or may not issue a ticket. That is a consideration of fault. It doesn't mean that's right, but it's a consideration. They look at the facts of what's said at the scene. If you step out of your car and you say, I'm sorry, it was my fault, that could be used against you later.
Oh, wow.
You'd be very careful. You know, with the adrenaline going, sometimes people, it's just human nature to say, I'm sorry. Yeah. But if that could be used against you as an admission against your interests. You know, other things, where is the damage on the car? They look at to see, okay, if the damage is in the back, that tells you someone ran in the back as opposed to being on the side of the car. Witnesses. You know, there may be someone who was driving and saw what happened. And all those things come together and are analyzed and evaluated by lawyers, juries, adjusters, and they determine, hey, if you're more than 51% at fault, you may not recover anything in the state of Illinois.
So then, at the scene, obviously things are happening quickly. Perhaps you get a ticket and come to find out, wait, I'm not at fault. You know, you were 51% or more at fault, not me, but yeah, I received a ticket. How do you deal with things like that? That was one of the questions that came in advance of this conversation.
Well, count to 10. I know that can be very upsetting that you get the ticket and you feel that you're not at fault driver. But then what I would do then is the next day or the day after that, I would contest that ticket. You don't have to say, yes, I agree to that ticket. If you simply blow that ticket off or just pay it, that could be seen as you admitting you're guilty or you're at fault party. And then at that point, it may be too late to go back. So if you get that ticket, I would say contest it. You can call the state's attorney's office and set up a court hearing date and have a hearing saying that you weren't at fault, and here are the facts why.
And you got to be careful with that, though, I assume. You can't just do that for any time you're issued a ticket on something. But in this case, you know that there is damage, whether it be to your property, your vehicle, to yourself, or you know that this is going to turn into an insurance case, that you have to have a reason behind not or contesting the ticket?
Plus, time is money.
Yeah.
If we're talking about damage to your car of $50, do you want to go down and sit at the courthouse contesting a ticket? So you're going to have to assess what your damages are and what bodily injury you have. And it may be worthwhile to do that. And you can contact your own insurance company and talk to them about it. Say, I don't want to contest this, and they'll lead you in the right direction.
One other thing you and I talked about before in preparation for this, which really kind of surprised me and made me think a little more, was if I am in an accident and I want to find out, am I really at fault for this? I don't believe I am. I'm not at fault, but then it comes back, I am at fault. Now I just set myself up to be sued by the other person.
Yeah, you could. If you do the investigation yourself, or you talk to an attorney, or you start doing the legwork, and you're realizing that maybe I was more than 51% at fault, that person, another involved in the accident, could potentially sue you and your insurance company for that event.
Right.
So be careful how hard you press if you're the guilty party or you're more at fault. You got to be careful.
Now, in your experience, have you seen a lot of cases where perhaps somebody is ticketed and then it's found out later that they're not at fault, or perhaps something at the scene, but then when the adjusters and the attorneys got into it later to look at it, it wasn't exactly what you saw at the very beginning?
What attorneys do and what we do is we analyze the facts as you come in. That's this typical situation that we look at all the facts, the police report, the history our client gave us, the witness statements, and we start realizing maybe the ticket isn't getting everything right. So what our office will do on your behalf is we will contest that for you, because it's an important aspect of the case, and we make sure that the facts that are in your support will be presented to the criminal judge or the judge that hears the case, and could be the state's attorney's office, to ensure you are protected. That's what we do. These are complicated issues, and sometimes liens and bills are important. That's why it's important to obtain an attorney.
You got to make sure you're doing everything right.
Yes.
So, one of the questions we did receive in advance was that I was involved in an auto accident. It was the other driver's fault, so that was already determined. But the insurance company for that driver wants me to give a recorded statement. Right. Do I have to do that?
You do not have to do that, and I'm sure you've seen this before and heard this before. Don't give a recorded statement if you think that you are the party who are entitled to some damages. Okay. That adjuster for that other company is not taking a question because they like you or a recorded statement because they just need to talk to you. They are looking for facts that may go against you to make you the at-fault driver.
So talk to your attorney before you agree to doing...
I would consult with an attorney. If someone's to take a recorded statement, I would hit the pause button and then reach out to an attorney and say, I was involved in an auto accident. They want to take my recorded statement. What do I do?
All right, let's jump into the types of damages that are available. We've got several of them. Yeah. So let's start off with economic losses. I mean, that's one of the first things people think of is, I got into this accident. Oh, maybe I can't do this, I can't do that. The economic losses I'm going to have to pay to fix things. Yep. So
one of the economic losses that's key to this is lost wages. If you get an auto accident that requires you to go to the hospital, requires you to be off work, that is considered as part of your damages if you lose wages as a result of this accident.
Property damage?
Property damage, car, what it takes to do that. Glasses, if you get glasses get injured, anything that's property-wise that's affected by this accident.
What if you're in an accident and it ends up tearing up someone's yard? You get into an accident going down a busy road and you run off the road and you hit someone's sign or mailbox or tear up their yard. Does that kind of fall in there?
That's a third person. That would be the property owner, because it's their property. Could come in and say, because of that wrong party, that party at-fault driver, they may be responsible for paying that damages.
Interesting. All right, medical expenses, we kind of have touched on this already, but this is another type of damage that's available.
It is. And the most important one is pain and suffering. Unlike other cases, they will consider your complaints, the anguish you had because of a surgery. So in auto cases, pain and suffering is something to consider, and that's very important.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but when we do come back, we've got a few more types of damages that could be available to you if you're in this type of a situation. But we're going to take a quick break. I want to remind everybody, Stephen Kelly, the office is located at 2710 Knoxville Avenue, also in Princeton and in Springfield, and the number is 681-1900. If you have questions about what we're talking about, call that number, 681-1900, and someone from Stephen's office will get back to you and answer your questions right away. So stay right here. We're going to be right back with more with Stephen Kelly.
If you have someone who works with you who tests positive, you've been exposed to that, you quarantine, you may have no symptoms. Under those circumstances, I think you can make the argument that, hey, this is related to work.
Right.
You're telling me not to come in and someone at work was exposed. You have an argument that the work comp benefit should be paid to that time period.
We're back with Ask the Attorney, and we're back with Stephen Kelly. We've been talking about automobile insurance. In the last segment, we were talking about the different types of damages that may be available to you. I want to hit two more. You touched on pain and suffering, but we also need to look at past, present, and future. Explain what that means.
Well, certainly as a result of the automobile accident, you may not only have bills that came in, you may need ongoing care. So if you have, let's say, a catastrophic back injury that would require pain management, those bills for the future care can be considered in the value of the settlement or the trial of the case. So certainly lost wages down the road you may occur down the road can be calculated and incorporated into the value of the case.
Okay. And I'm sure this next piece is the biggest part of all, and that's the process of a lawsuit. If you are in an accident, it doesn't necessarily mean that you instantly have a lawsuit. There are a lot of steps you need to go through to determine if you can actually file it. So if you do, what are the steps?
Well, obviously, they're not just going to, the insurance company's not going to write you a check. So there's a process, and they hire an attorney, you hire an attorney. The first step is filing the lawsuit, and that's filed over in the county, the courthouse here in Peoria, and that starts the process. That lets the parties know that, hey, look, we're looking into this and we're going to pursue damages. The process starts then, it's the discovery process. Just like we talked about before, we're starting to assess the fault in the case. And what happens is then subpoenas are sent out to the medical providers so we all can evaluate and see what type of treatment you receive. But also we look at witness statements. We talk to those witnesses that are listed on the police reports. And at that point, there's what they call an interrogatory process. And what happens is their attorney, the insurance company, and your attorney exchange questions amongst the parties. And these questions aren't just 3 or 4 questions. Sometimes it's 16 pages, and they ask about your past medical treatment. They ask about your past driving. They ask what you were doing at the time of the accident. They ask if you were on the phone at the time of the accident. They ask if you were distracted. All these questions are geared to assess fault. And you need the help of an attorney to navigate those questions. Don't try to do it by yourself, because these are questions, as you answer them, are going to be used at your deposition at the next step.
And at this place in the process, is it person versus person? Is it insurance company versus insurance company? Is it who are we going after, and vice versa?
That's a great question. On the pleading and the lawsuit, it's person versus person.
Okay.
But a lot of times it's the insurance company who's defending the case for the at-fault driver, and they hire the attorney. And they pay the attorney. So that is exactly, they are the insurance companies behind the curtains, running the defense of the case.
So we're in the discovery phase.
Yes.
We've got subpoenas going out to talk to medical. We've got police reports going on. We've got witnesses who may have been there. What else are we trying to find?
Well, at that point then, once the written discovery is done, then we're actually going to start the process of depositions. And that's, you'll come to this office and you'll sit here with your attorney, and they'll ask you, it's a discovery deposition, they'll ask you 3 hours of questions about any medications you were on, what were you doing that day, where were you coming from, did you have anything to drink? Well, the same token, I as your attorney would have the opportunity to ask questions of the defendant. And we would do the same thing. I'd ask the same questions. And we're gathering information. And we'd compare your testimony to your answers you gave to those questions to make sure everything's coordinated. And we also compare your testimony to the medical records Did you tell the doctor what you're claiming you told the doctor? What would the doctor say to you? And what was your past medical history? All those things are examined to determine the value of the case.
Okay. And then after the depositions, then what's the next phase of that? Mediation?
Well, at that point, maybe start talking settlement because you got
Okay.
all the facts in. While this is all going on, there may be the judge is monitoring and maybe setting it for trial. There are case management, case meetings they set. And there is sometimes under policies that you may have or I may have a mandatory mediation clause. And what happens is you would have a mediation somewhere by a mediator picked by both parties. And that's not the jury trial. That's just by a mediator.
And so the mediator's then trying to get you to come to some sort of agreement so that we don't have to go to the next step?
Exactly. They try to hear the facts. They try to get the parties to meet at a number that everybody's happy with and then resolve the case.
And then say the mediation doesn't work, you haven't come up with a settlement, the next step is trial.
Trial by jury, by members of your society. They'll hear the evidence that was just gathered, the evidence that's presented to them from all the interrogatories, the depositions, the doctor's depositions. That's presented to a jury under the control of a judge. And there are certain rules of evidence that keep it streamlined. And then it's up to that jury to assess two things. One is they'll assess fault. Okay. They'll determine who was at fault, at what degree. They will assess fault to your actions, and if your degree of fault could be used against you to mitigate the damages. Okay. Then also the jury will award damages. They'll hear the facts, they'll measure the type of injury you had, the damage, the property, all the above, and they'll assess damages.
This sounds like it's a really long process.
It is. It could go on 2 to 3 years, even longer, because there's so many cases backed up. And it's just not a fast process. And we talked about comparing it to the workers' compensation system. The workers' compensation system was set up to be fast. You get injured at work, your medical care, treatment, and off-work benefits go quick. But what the legislature in Illinois gave back to the employers was there's no pain and suffering in workers' compensation cases. It's a set formula what the case is worth. Well, in auto cases, there is pain and suffering. And that's a magical number that we can't. I can't tell you what a jury is going to come back at pain and suffering. There's no schedule. We don't know.
And there's really no bottom, there's no top out, there's no bottom, so it's just kind of open to interpretation of what happens when.
It is. And it's so important, the presentation to the jury, what type of case you have, because if the jury doesn't like your client, they could award you nothing. Yeah. So the preparation, being ready for it, being honest to the jury is very important. So
you said this could take couple years, but it could also be over in a couple of months.
Yep. If settlement goes through and the parties agreed, the settlement can go as fast as you want. If it goes in front of a jury, I can almost guarantee you it's going to be a couple of years at least after the process plays out as far as the discovery and getting the case ready for trial.
And you also have attorney's fees that come into all of this on top of all of the other fees you're dealing with. So how do you determine attorney's fees for something like this?
When you hire an attorney in the state of Illinois, it's 33% of what you get from the jury or the settlement. So the attorney is driven, hopefully, and also the attorney has an incentive to do a good job. But you should never pay the attorney, if you hire them, by the hour.
Well, we only have a little bit of time left, so to recap this, number one, we know auto insurance is required by law, but there are some things that you should consider that are kind of add-ons to your benefits.
Yeah, protect yourself, protect your family. These decisions you make before the auto accident are so important, and it's such an easy process because once you get in an auto accident, everything turns upside down. Bills are coming in, and the time to make this educated decisions before you get into this position.
And if you are in an accident, first two things to think of.
Well, first of all, take a deep breath, go home, but get your medical care you need if you get injured. That's very important.
Okay. Well, Stephen Kelly, thanks so much for doing this with us today. And want to remind people they can give you a call. 681-1900 is your number. If they have questions about this or any other type of personal injury, workers' compensation, anything like that, they can give you a call. You're located at 2710 North Knoxville and then also in Princeton and in Springfield.
Correct. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a good night.
Ask the Attorney is brought to you by Stephen Kelly Law.